The Obama administration is pressuring the food industry to make it easier for Americans to get healthier. And it's issuing new guidelines to limit the amount of sodium in food. The goal is to reduce deaths from heart disease and stroke. Americans eat about a third more salt than the daily recommended amount. But there are things that we can do right now to take personal responsibility for our own health. And with us this morning is registered dietitian Kayla Fisher from UF Health. Thanks so much for being with us. She's here to talk about what these guidelines mean for us day to day, and also go over some of the things that we can do to cut down on the amount of sodium we get. And I think a lot of people are thinking, well, you know, I don't pick up the salt shaker and salt my eggs in the morning, so I'm not getting too much sodium. What do you say to that? Straighten that out for us.
Absolutely. Well, it's important to keep in mind that salt and sodium are two separate things. So sodium is in salt, sodium chloride, but sodium is also in many of the foods we eat in different forms, different ingredients. So even if we're not adding salt to our food at the table, we're getting a lot of sodium in the processed and commercially prepared foods we do eat.
And there's a lot of hidden sodium in things like restaurant foods, but what are the foods we really should avoid if we want to cut down on salt?
Absolutely. Some of the saltiest foods that we eat are the highly processed foods like breads, crackers, and rolls, cold cuts, deli meats, processed meats, frozen meals, canned goods, canned vegetables, and even condiments.
I mean, they're loaded, and I know frozen dinners too seem to have a lot of sodium in them.
They do, even the healthy ones.
Yeah, that's right. All right, so you've got a nice little presentation here for us just so we can kind of visualize how much salt we're getting. Tell us, what does this represent here, these four?
So these four huge containers of salt represent the average amount of sodium that Americans are consuming per year. It's about 500 teaspoons right there.
That's a lot of salt. Okay.
It is.
And what's this?
This is the daily recommended limit for our sodium intake, 2,300 milligrams.
This for the whole day?
Correct.
Now, look at that, folks. I know people, that's about how much they put on their eggs in the morning.
Yes, and keep in mind, this is not the amount of salt we should add per day, but this is the sodium limit per day, which shows up in the foods we're already eating.
Okay. That's a lot to ask. That's a lot to ask of people to give that up. How do you recommend people start gradually cutting the salt? What are some of the best things to do other than avoiding those processed foods?
Well, keep in mind, like we said, most of our sodium intake is coming from processed foods. Over 75% of the sodium you eat each day is processed foods, not salt that you're adding. So the #1 thing we can do is cut back or cut out those processed, packaged, commercially prepared foods, like the frozen dinners, the canned vegetables, the fast food. That's the best way to decrease your sodium intake, and instead to focus on your fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, as these foods are naturally low in sodium.
So the natural stuff, as raw as it can get, you know, right from the ground or the earth or whatever, that's where you're the safest.
Absolutely, closest to nature as it comes.
Why, people may be saying, well, I don't have high blood pressure, so why should I worry about sodium?
It's definitely a part of preventative health. So maintaining a healthy eating plan that is lower in added salt and added sodium is going to help you prevent that in the future. Too much sodium intake has been connected to heart disease, high blood pressure, and higher risk of stroke.
Now, in patients that you work with who have to cut down on their salt, do you find that the less they eat, the less they need it?
Absolutely. Patients tell me all the time after they've cut back on their sodium in foods or salt intake, a few weeks later, they'll go back to eating a food they ate before, maybe pizza, and they tell me, I can't believe how salty it tasted. So taste buds change, usually 3 to 4 weeks, and you'll see a difference.
All right, Kayla Fisher, thank you so much for joining us this morning. If you'd like to know more about this topic on news4jax.com right now, we've got a lot of information from the American Heart Association. There's also a simple 3-week plan to make those recommended changes. Scott?
Power boats are back in the River City. Who took